What's going on YouTube? It's James Q Quick from Learn, Build, Teach, and I'm really excited to come back today to do a part 2 of building a Pokedex with vanilla JavaScript. So in part 1, we used the Pokemon API and we did some queries to get information about each Pokemon, and we got them displayed here. We're gonna take this another step further and allow you to click on a Pokemon to get a few extra details in this little pop-up page, and then have this close button to cancel it out, and you can go and see information about all these Pokemon. That's what we're gonna do in this video. Let's go ahead and dive on in. All right, so one of the biggest things I want to change in this video is before we were making all 150 API requests up front. We did some fancy stuff with promise.all to make sure that those were run in parallel instead of sequentially so that they ran as fast as possible. And it worked pretty well to display the information. But someone brought up to me in the comments that you could query the Pokemon API by passing it a limit of 150. And in one call, this will send you at least the names of each Pokemon. So you get the name here and then the URL. So what happens is with this new version, we're going to make one call to get all of the information that's displayed here. Then when you click on the Pokemon, we'll go and get that individual's Pokemon's information from the API and display it for the user. So that's the big thing that we're going to do. We're going to create that pop-up, add a close button to that. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive on in. I'm actually, like I said, really excited about this, being kind of back in nostalgia world for being around Pokemon. So I'm gonna get rid of a lot of this stuff. Let's actually just do that. Let's clear that out. Let's come to the Pokemon API, and I'm gonna grab the base part. So I'm gonna say the URL is, and make sure we put that in quotes, and then say Pokemon, and then a query parameter of limit 150. Then we can make this asynchronous. So let's make that an async function. This way we can get a response by using the fetch API and that URL. So we'll get that response, and then we'll convert that response to basically get the JSON data out of that response by calling res.json, JSON, not JSON. And both of these will need to await. So because this is an asynchronous function, we'll await this data to come back, or the response to come back, and then we'll extract the JSON data out of that, the body of that return value, into a data property here. Let's just start by logging this data so we can look at it and just make sure it looks like what we expect. So let's come back over. We've got this in live reload here, and I'm doing these side by side so we can see that. Let's open up the console. See the object, it's got a results, and inside of the results, it's an array of objects that have a name and URL. So what I want to do is I want to take those results and convert them into a Pokemon array. So let's use the data.results, and let's call map. Let's get a reference to each result, I guess, and the index of that result. And then what we want to return is basically we're just converting the results to now just the information that we care about. So for each of these, we'll get the name, and that comes from data.name. And then we'll get the ID from the index. So the indices here in array.map are zero-based or zero-based indexes. For Pokemon indexes, obviously need to have them start at 1. And then we'll create the image. And this is one of the reasons that in the past I made this query to the individual Pokemon to start, because I was trying to find an image URL. And if you look in the data that's returned, you get a sprite and then a front default, and that's the one I was using. What I found out though, or someone brought up to me actually, I want to make sure that I don't take all the credit for that, is this URL is the exact same for each Pokemon, so you don't need to query for that information as long as you have the index. So if we just pass in the variable index plus 1, this will go and get the image URL for that specific Pokemon, so that takes care of that. And that's actually all the information we need. Now we can call display Pokemon with our new set of Pokemon data. If we get rid of that starting O, Let's save this. Let's come back. We should see all of our information except for type is not being displayed. And it looks like our name is missing too. So let's see. Let's console log Pokemon to see what information we created. So here's the stuff we created. And let's look at each one. Is there a name property? And that is coming back as undefined. So let's look at the original part. Or which one of these is actually coming from the API. I think we changed the log. So let's log out the original data results here. And make sure we're getting, so it's a name property. That looks right. Oh, this should be result.name. Now we see the name is coming back, but the type is coming back undefined because when you just do this query for 150 Pokemon all at once, you only get basically the name. You don't get the other information as well. Another thing I want to copy over is the URL, or let's say API URL, and we can call this the result.url. Let's make sure that that is coming back okay. And what that is that's what we're going to actually call here in a second to get the further information about this Pokemon. So one thing I want to show you is we're getting two properties from that individual result. Let's add the extra comma there. Getting two properties, and we're specifically going and grabbing them. We could just go ahead and do a ... result. And what this will do is this is the spread operator. It'll take every property inside of result and just copy it into the Pokemon object that we're creating for ourselves. So what this will look like in the end is we'll have both properties that come from that information, so URL and name, and then we're calculating the ID and the image. So that's all the information that we need. You can see it's being displayed appropriately here. The thing we want to change is I no longer want to try to display the Pokemon type, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. That's what we're going to use our detailed stuff for. So I think we've optimized the way we make our request. We're making one initial request with this URL up here. Now when we click on one of these Pokemon, we need to go out and get that individual Pokemon. So to do that, we're going to add an on click inside of each card, and we'll call this select Pokemon, and we'll pass in the Pokemon.id. All right, so we'll pass in that ID, and now we need to create that function, and so we'll do const select Pokemon equals, and this is actually going to be an async function too, because we're going to make a fetch request there. It's going to take an ID in there, and then just to make sure this is connected, we'll just log out the ID. So let's pull back open the console so we can see that. Let me make this a little bit bigger too. Give us some more space here. So let's click on this one, missing argument list. Oh, typo there. You probably already saw it. Click on this one. There's undefined. And are we passing? Oh, Pokemon ID. All right, let's try this again. Hopefully we see 1, 2. All right, cool. So we're able to track which one of these Pokemon we are clicking on. Let's get rid of some of these log statements. There we go. So we're able to track which one we're clicking on. Now we need to go out and get the detailed information about that individual Pokemon. So basically this is going to be very similar. Let me grab the URL for this that we want to use. This is going to be very similar to what we just did above, where we've got the API call, and then we're going to dynamically pass in the value of the Pokemon. We'll get the response by calling await and using the fetch API to call that URL. And then, oops, looks like we need an equals there. And then we'll get the data equals res.json. That will need to be awaited too. And so at this point, we should have the individual information about the individual Pokemon. So I'll just call this Pokemon because that's what we did for individuals earlier. And then let's call a display pop-up passing in that Pokemon that we just got back. So we'll need to create that function. So const display pop-up, and it's going to take in a Pokemon. And let's just log out the Pokemon that we get in here. So let's click on Bulbasaur, and you see it gets back. Here's the information that comes back from the API call. So for each one of these, it'll make that API call, and we'll see that information come back. And now we just need to create that actual pop-up that gets displayed. So we did some parsing of this information before to try to get the types. So if you look in types, it's kind of nested. There's types, and then there's two objects. Inside of the object is a type object that then has a name property that then tells you what the actual type is. So what I'm going to do is what we did before, basically, is do Pokemon, if I can type, Pokemon.types.map. I'm going to grab each one of those types, and I'm going to convert it to type.type.name, and then do a .join on that and separate them by commas. So this is going to take each one of these names of the types, put them all together, and then separate them by commas. So this is again in the past video. Let's get rid of that log. So we should see now, if we click, hopefully we get poison, comma, grass. Same thing for Ivysaur. Charmander is just fire. And so now we've got the type correctly, or correct. Now we can start to create our HTML string. So what we're going to do is create a div with a class of pop-up. All right, so we've got our parent div for this. That pop-up is going to take up the entire screen. We're going to add a close button, ID equals close button, and we'll say on click is going to be close pop-up. We'll have to create that function in a second. All right, so we've got that for the button, put close in there. All right, so we've got our button there. That's what we're gonna do to close. And then we're basically just gonna copy. Let's just grab this part. And we're basically just gonna copy in that HTML. We'll make this a div instead of an LI. Let me put that in there, that in there. So this will now, and maybe I guess we'll see it at the top. Well, we need to do two more things before we can actually see it. What we're doing again is for each Pokemon, we're going to create a div with a class of pop-up. We've got a button in here that will be used to close it. Inside of the pop-up, we'll have the card information, and we can get rid of the on click. Don't need that at this point. The card information where we'll display the Pokemon image and the ID and name, and then also we'll go ahead and throw in the information that you see right here. So this will be height, weight, and then type that we just calculated. So let's go ahead and grab that. That'll be a P tag, and I'll do all of the labels basically as small. So height equals, and then close out the small. And this is maybe going to get a little harder to see. Let's make this bigger for now while we're doing this. So height, and then we'll add in the Pokemon height. All right, so we got that. We're going to separate the properties from each other with these pipes here. Now I'll just paste in, we'll do weight. All right, and then lastly, we'll do, I'm going to paste in again, and we'll do type and grab the type, lowercase variable type. So let's just log this out, HTML string, and we'll use this HTML string in a second. Let's come back to the browser, and we'll click on one of these, and we should see the HTML, which looks actually pretty close to what we want. Can I make this a little bit bigger? Let's make this a little bit bigger here so we can actually see it. So it looks like I'm getting undefined for the weight. Did I misspell something in the weight over here? Yeah, lowercase w. And let's come back to the browser. And so we got our class of pop-up. We got our close button, calling a close pop-up function, We've got our card, we've got our image. Looks like the image is not showing up, so we'll need to figure out why that's not the case. The name is showing up, that's good. The height, weight, and type is showing up, so that all looks really good except for the image. And what did we call that property up here? Make sure we called that the right thing. Image. Is there a typo in here? Command.image. That looks like the right thing. I'm not sure why that's not coming through. We'll figure that out in a second. So we've got this piece right there. Now we need some way to actually use this HTML inside of our application. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add this HTML to the beginning of the Pokedex DOM element that we already have up above. So Pokedex is up here. We've already got that thing. Now inside of the Pokedex UL, let's just put in some extra content. Say enter HTML equals HTML string plus the existing HTML string that's already inside. So enter HTML, save that. And now let's close this. Let's come up to the top. Let's click on Bulbasaur. Now you can see that we've got this information actually showing up. Our close button is here. We've got the information about that Pokemon in the card there. That's actually what we want, so that's good. Now we need to actually style this thing because it looks really horrible. And it still looks like Pokemon image is not coming through. Although it seems to, so it works here. That image is obviously coming through. And it's being displayed, Pokemon image. It should be the same thing. I'm not sure why that's not coming through. All right, so just realize that the information that we're using as Pokemon here came from that API call. So we actually need to get the new image URL. So it is going to be Pokemon, and then it's going to be .sprites, and then we want to get the specific sprite for front default. So let's see if that is working. That still didn't quite come, and now we need to update this. Instead of doing Pokemon.image, to just be image. So let's try one more time. Click on Bulbasaur. There's the picture showing up. Okay, that's good. That's great. So now we need to create our close pop-up function. So const close pop-up. And what we want to do in here is basically just get rid of the element, the HTML element. And let's look at our HTML while we're doing this so we can see. So if we look inside of UL, let's refresh this thing. Inside of UL, we've got all these things. When we click on this, it adds in this new div, and it looks like, all right, so it adds in the new div, and then it got rid of all of the other stuff. I think that's because we have a typo, it must be. So we want to make sure that we're adding something to the beginning of the existing HTML. So HTML string plus Pokedex, enter with 3 ends. That's not right. All right, let's try this again. Let's see how it looks. So this should add some stuff at the beginning. You still got Bulbasaur down below. And this will change out to Ivysaur up there as well. All right, so now with our close pop-up, let's just look at what we're dealing with. Inside of the UL, we've got 2 pop-ups. Let's refresh here. So inside of UL, we've got all these cards. We click on one, it adds a div to the beginning of this UL. And basically, we just want to go in and remove that from the DOM. So this close pop-up, let's get a reference to it. So pop-up equals document, query selector. It's going to have a class of pop-up. And we want to remove it by getting its parent. So parent element, and then calling remove child. Oops, remove child, and then telling it we want to remove the pop-up child that we just selected, if that makes sense. So this will find the pop-up, the thing with the class of pop-up. It will look at its parent to then tell it to remove pop-up as its child. That's a little convoluted, but that's what we need to do. So if we click on Bulbasaur, we'll get the extra Bulbasaur up here. Close should now get rid of that. And now we're back to just our regular Pokemon. So that's actually working really well. Now we just need to style this thing to make it work a little bit better. So I'm going to give more room for the browser. I wonder when can we hit, there we go. Let's see 2 Pokemon side by side, and we can see that's what it looks like when we have the extra one. All right. So I want to come down and I want to first style this pop-up. And obviously this is going to need to be full screen and be on top of everything else. Let's do a class of pop-up. We'll do a position of fixed. This will just leave it on the screen. We'll do some absolute positioning, or it's position fixed, but just kind of absolutely placing it. Top 0, left 0. That's going to start at the top left. Then we'll make the height 100 view height. This will make it 100% of the height of the screen. Width 100 VW, viewport width. And let's save that and let's just see. So you see that pops up on top there. Not looking great just yet, but it's getting pretty close. And let's give a background to this. So we'll do the background of F4, F4, F4. This now you should see it'll take up the entire screen. All right, that's getting pretty close. Want to add just a touch of opacity. So we'll do this as 0.95 just so you can see through just a bit. And then to make sure that the content in the pop-up is centered, we'll use display flex, justify content, center, and align items center to make sure that stuff is completely centered. So now let's look again. All right, so that's looking really good. Now we want to just fix this close button. And this close button is going to be absolutely positioned inside of the pop-up. So position absolute. And we want to put this 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the right. So see if we have any other, yeah, we'll style that button in a second. Click on this. Now we get our full pop-up, which is great. We have our close button in the right spot. And then we can go ahead and close that out. Cool. So I think the last thing we want to do is just style that button. So let's grab it and do a background color of orange, red, and padding of 10 pixels and 20 pixels on left and right. Border, none. Color, make sure the text color is white. Border radius, just give it a little bit of curvature at 3 pixels. And then we'll add a transition to transform 100 milliseconds. That's because I'm going to just add a little bit of a shadow and a movement effect when we hover. And so button hover, when we hover on this, we want to turn the cursor to a pointer and then do a transform, translate, and we'll do a translate Y. We're just going to bump this up 1 pixel. And then I didn't get too fancy with colors or any of this, but I'm just going to add a box shadow on the element with a 2 pixel blur for dark red. That'll just give it a little bit of color contrast when we hover. So let's come back. Let's click on one of these. You see the button here. You see that hover effect. You see it has a nice little kind of animation or transition, I guess. And it's got the hover. Now we can close it out. We can get the Ivysaur information and show that. One thing I do want to change, it's bugging me. These list items, come back up here to the card hover. We should go ahead and add the cursor pointer just so people know that it's something we can click on. All right, so now I think that looks pretty good. Now, this is basically what I wanted to accomplish, but I want to add one extra thing here. And it's the fact that if we look at our network tab, let me shrink this down a little bit. And let's look at our network tab. I click on Ivysaur, it makes a request to the API. I close it. I click on Ivysaur again, it makes the same request. I click on Ivysaur again, it makes the same request. So we're not going to do anything too fancy, but we can actually go ahead and cache the information that we get back when we do this query. And that's what we're going to do here. So if we ever query for information about a specific Pokemon, we'll cache it inside of our application and use the cache if we've already queried it before instead of querying again. So I'm going to create something called a Polka Cache, and it's just going to be an empty object. And so every time we select a Pokemon, I want to check, well, one, when we select a Pokemon, I want to add that information to the cache. So I want to go into Polka Cache and set at the ID. So the ID is going to be the key. The value is going to be the actual Pokemon information, the actual Pokemon. I'm going to log this out to make sure that it's working. Polka Cache. All right, let's save that. Let's click on one of these. Click on this thing. We'll see, makes the request. Let's close it. Let's check out the console. And so now Polka Cache should have an ID or a key of 1 and then the information for Bulbasaur cached there. So now when we query, instead of querying directly, if the Polka Cache of ID does not exist, so if we don't already have it in our cache, we'll do this part. Otherwise, we'll just call display Pokemon or display pop-up with whatever's already in the cache. So Polka Cache, passing in the ID as the key. So again, what we're doing here is we're checking to see if this information is already cached. If it's not, we go ahead and retrieve it. So we retrieve it from the API. When we do retrieve it, we go ahead and save that information in our Polka Cache with the key being the ID. If that information was already cached, there's no need to call again. So we'll just call display pop-up directly by using the stuff that's already in the cache. So let's load this again. Let's check out our network tab this time. Let's click on Bulbasaur. This should make a request. Click on, let's close that out. We'll click on Ivysaur. That should make a request. But if we click on Bulbasaur again, notice it doesn't make another request because it's already got that information in the cache. If we click on Ivysaur, not making a request because it's already got that information in the cache. And lastly, if we click on one of my favorite Pokemon, Charizard, that isn't in the cache, it will then go out and make that request. So I think that's super, super cool. We got to do some cool things with looking at caching data, making REST requests to the Pokemon API, creating our own custom pop-up, and being able to close that pop-up to display details about the individual Pokemon. So that is building a Pokedex with vanilla JavaScript part 2. Again, if you're a Pokemon nerd like I am, you probably enjoyed that. I enjoyed doing this. I hope you did too. And I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out learnbuildteach.com to sign up for the newsletter to learn about my latest content. Thanks for watching.